Shalom, we're continuing our limud of Shmuel Beis. We're up to Perek Yud Ches, and if you remember, David has now crossed the Yarden, and Avshalom and his army is in hot pursuit, and there's going to be a milchama. David, in the meantime, has been supported by some generous benefactors who gives him food and mattresses and utensils, and the most well-known is Barzillai from Gilad, Barzillai HaGiladi. Now we're going to describe the actual war. Vayifko David asama sherito. David counted the people that were with him. Vayasam aleim sari alav mazari meyais. He assigned generals over 1,000, every group of 1,000, then every group of 100, subordinate generals. Vayishalach David asam hashlishis biad Yoav, vashlishis biad Avishai ben Tzeruya achi Yoav, vashlishis biad Itai Hagiti. That David divided his army into 3 groups, a third under Yoav, who is his chief general, a second third under Avishai, who was Yoav's brother, and the third under a man who may not even have been Jewish, but he was a Ger Toshav who accepted the 7 mitzvos, Itai from the city of Gas, which is a Philistine city, Vayomer HaMelech Eloham, and David even says, I will lead one of the armies. I will go out to fight with you. I want to fight as well, because this is a need for a Yeshua for Am Yisrael. Now, of course, as we're going to read further, David does not want to hurt Avshalom. In fact, that might be part of the cheshbon. He wants to be sure that nothing happens to Avshalom, but he also wants to fight the Milchamais Hashem. Vayomer ha'am, but the people didn't let him go to war. Vayomer ha'am lo seitze, do not go to war with us. Ki im nos namus, because even if we wind up running away from battle, lo yosimu eleinu leiv, the enemy is not going to pay attention to us. Meaning to say, you're not safe. You're the person they're after. So even if we're running away, they're not going to bother with us. They're going to kill you. Even if they could kill more than half of us, they don't care about it. Kiata kamainu asara alafim. You are worth more than 10,000 soldiers to them. Viata tov kisiya lanu meir lazor. You should remain in the city, which is Machanayim, to provide moral support. Whatever you want me to do, I will do. The king waited at the gate of the city as the armies were being sent out. And the armies were leaving, the 3 armies, the hundreds and the thousands. And now, Vayitzav HaMelech es Yoav v'es Avishai v'es Itai. David gave explicit instructions to all 3 generals, Yoav, his brother Avishai, and Itai Hagiti. La'at li lenar li Avshalom. Treat the young man, again implying that Avshalom is not so responsible, he's a kid. Treat the kid Avshalom in a gentle way. And the pasuk emphasizes this was not just said privately to them. This was said very publicly so that everybody heard it. V'chol ha'am shamu b'tzavos hamelech es kol hasarim al devar Avshalom. Everyone heard when the king gave the command, do not hurt Avshalom. It's David's son. Vayetze ha'am hasadir likras Yisrael. And the Am that was with David went into the battlefield to fight against the other Jews, the majority of people who were with Avshalom. Remember, Avshalom had a huge army of Kol Yisrael. That was the Eitzah of Chushai. Vatihya milchama b'yar Ephraim. And the war was in the forests that belonged to Ephraim. So Rashi raises an interesting question. Given the fact that they are fighting Aver Hayarden, and Aver Hayarden belonged only to Ruvain, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, why would there be a forest that belonged to Shevet Ephraim? So Rashi answers that based on the Gemara in Bava Kama, one of the conditions that Yoshua ben Nun laid down when Eretz Yisrael was divided is that you could always graze your lands in forests. That the forests of Eretz Yisrael were considered to be hefker for purposes of grazing land. And since Ephraim is right over the western part of the Yarden, they used to cross the Yarden and use this forest, which was in the land of Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, for their grazing. So because it was hefker, so it was called Yar Ephraim. And here it says, in spite of Avshalom's greater numbers, David's armies, there are three armies, were Menatseach. Vayinagfu sham Am Yisrael ifnei avdei David, that Am Yisrael were smitten and defeated by the servants of David. Vatihi shama magefa gedela biyomahu esrim elef, 20,000 casualties on Avshalom's side. Vatihi sham hamilchama nifotzes al pnei kol haaretz, and the battle spread because people were running away, and the battle kept on getting larger and larger. Vayerev hayar lechol biyam yasher achla hacherev biyomahu. So it's a strange pasuk. The pasuk says the forest consumed more people than the sword. Rashi brings that from the Targum Yonasan, that this means that the forest was filled with wild animals, lions and bears. And apparently when people escaped into those forests, more people were killed. Again, that's hard to imagine, because if there were unless the 20,000 casualties include the people who died in the forest. Because if you're going to tell me 20,000 died in the war, then it's hard to hear that more than 20,000 died from the wild animals. But that is how Targum Yonasan learns. Vayi Kareh, and it happened to be Avshalom ifnei avdei David, that Avshalom was going to be encountered by David's servants, and now it explains what that means. Avshalom reichev ala peret, Avshalom is riding on a mule. Vayava peret tachas seivach ha'ela, and the mule was riding. Right, there was a tree, and the tree had overhanging branches, and the mule was riding under those branches, Agdola. But Avshalom had long, beautiful hair, and the branches were fairly low. So what happened was, v'yechazak rosho ba'ela, the beautiful hair on his head got caught in the branches, so he was hanging by his hair. Vayutan beina shamayim ubeina aretz, he was suspended between heaven and earth. At least initially he could not get himself untangled. And in the meantime, the mule didn't stop. In other words, the mule kept on going, and Avshalom is left hanging. V'hapered asher tachtav avar. The pered, the mule, right? The mule is not a donkey; it's the horse, the child of a horse and a donkey. So eventually, Avshalom probably could have gotten himself off, but in the meantime, he's kind of stuck. Must have hurt the hair. Vayar ish echad, and a soldier saw, hey, that's Avshalom. V'yaged liYayev, and he told Yayev, there's Avshalom. Vayomer, and the man said to Yayev, Hinei re'isi as Avshalom tolei ba'el, I see Avshalom hanging from a tree, alive. Vayomer Yayev leish hamagid lei. Yayev says to the man, Hinei re'isa, you saw Avshalom, the king's enemy? Madua lo ikisei sham arza, why didn't you kill him? V'yolai laseis lecha asara keseh v'chagura achas. Remember, Avshalom is chayiv misa according to halacha, even though it's the king's son. Ma'arid b'malchus, I would give you a reward, right? Dead or alive, as they say. I will give you a reward of 10 pieces of silver and a special belt, kind of a heroism belt, like a kind of a medal. Vayomer haish el Yoav, V'lu anochi shekel al kapai elef kesef. Even if you would put in my hands 1,000 pieces of silver. Lo eshlach yadi el ben hamelech. I'm not going to kill the king's son. I heard what the king said. Ki bi'oznenu tziva hamelech oischa v'yas Avishai v'yas Ittai. I heard with my own ears David commanding you, Yoav, and your brother Avishai, and Ittai, the third general. Lamor, and David said beferish, Shimru mi benar be'Avshalom. Everybody, anybody, must protect the young man Avshalom. O asisi benafshi sheker. And let's imagine I would kill Avshalom to get my reward from you. And then I would lie, I would deny my involvement. Right? Could I have gotten away with it? The king finds out everything eventually. And he even says to Yoav, and that's an interesting, and you would stand on the side. You wouldn't even defend me. You would say, oh, he did it. I had nothing to do with it. So he says to Yoav, I'm not going to kill him. Vayomer Yoav, Lo kain oichila lefanacha. I'm going to stop begging you to do the job. I'll do it myself. Vayikach shaloisha shavatim. He takes 3 darts. These are like arrows that you throw without a bow. B'kapo in his hand. Vayitke'em b'leiv Avshalom. He threw the darts right into Avshalom's heart. Odenu chai b'leiv ha'ela. Avshalom was still alive when this happened, so Yoav killed him. And then what happened was, the implication is that Yoav didn't kill him, that immobilized him, so he couldn't escape. So he went into shock or something. And then what actually happened was, Vayasobu asara narim nosei kle Yoav, 10 young men who were Yoav's arms bearer, they surrounded Avshalom, Vayaku es Avshalom v'yimiseu, and they killed him. So it's interesting. It seems to be, like, why do you need 10 people to kill him? That they wanted to do it in such a way that no one person could be defined as the Reitzeach. They say, I believe, that in the United States, when they used to execute by shooting, a firing squad, all of the guns except one didn't have ammunition, but nobody knew that, so nobody knew who was the Rotzeach. So here it was kind of a way in which each person could claim they were not the Rotzeach. And then Yoav said, Baruch Hashem, we've gotten rid of the enemy, the war is over. David can now become king again. Vayiska Yoav b'shayfer, Yoav blew a shayfer to summon the armies. Vayashav Amir Dovach Rizal. He told his army, forget about pursuing the other Yidden, they're going to come back to us anyway. Ki chosach Yoav es Ami, withheld the people from Milchama. Vayikchu es Avshalom, they took the body of Avshalom, Yashlichu oso bayar el pachas gadol, very not coveted burial. They buried him in the middle of this forest, in a pit. V'yatzivu alav gal avonim gadol mihayid, they had just a big pile of stones. V'chol Yisrael, and all of Avshalom's army, which had already suffered a tremendous defeat. Nasu ishli olav, they ran away because who knows, they thought maybe Yoav will kill them all, although Lamaisa, Yoav is no longer interested in fighting. Now, we now have another parenthetical insert, that although Avshalom, according to this pasuk, was buried Aver LaYarden, in the middle of the Yar, Avshalom in his gaiva had built himself another monument. Avshalom lokach v'yatzev lo b'chayav es matzeves asher be'emek hamelech. Avshalom himself had built a tremendous monument in the valley of the king. This is another name for Nachal Kidrain. Ki Amar ein li ben. Avshalom had a daughter, but he did not have a son, and he wanted to make a monument for himself, avor hiskir shemi, that people should walk by and remember my name. Vayikra l'matzevet al shemo, and he called the monument after himself. Vayikare Lo, it was called Yad Avshalom. Yad is a hand, but it also means a remembrance of Avshalom ad hayom hazeh. Now, interestingly enough, in Nach Kidron, facing Har HaZeisim, there is indeed a monument, a very famous monument, that goes by the name Yad Avshalom, and some say that is mamash the Yad Avshalom that's referred to here. I just want to point out that even if that's correct, it would not be true to say Avshalom is buried there, because Fakert, the pasuk says Avshalom was buried, Eivir Liyardin, in the forest. It is also true that some say that that is not Yad Avshalom, and the designation of it being Yad Avshalom was a Christian designation. It really is a monument dating from the time of the Crusades. So I will leave that issue to the tour guides. I just want to say, though, that based on the psukim, it's not shaykh that Avshalom is buried there, even if that is Yad Avshalom. Okay. So, the Jewish people, or at least David HaMelech's side, has achieved a magnificent victory that will restore Malchus Beis David and enable David to return to Yerushalayim, but it was at the cost of Avshalom dying, even though that was not even necessary, because the Nitzachon was there anyway. So who's going to tell the king? So Achimaatz ben Tzadok, Achimaatz, the son of Tzadok the Kohen Gadol, who was the faithful go-between, says, Arutza na, I will go to Machanayim, where David is stationed, Va'avasra es HaMelech, I will give the king the good news. Ki shafato Hashem miyad oyevav, God has delivered him and judged him in a good way from all of his enemies. So Yayev doesn't want Achimaatz to be the bearer of bad news, because you try to avoid giving besoros ros. But again, Achimaatz seems to be oblivious to this. He thinks it's only good news. But Yomer lo Yayev. And Yayev says to Achimaatz, I don't think you ought to be the bearer of the news. Lo ish besura tohayom. You are not the one to give tidings. Ubisarta v'yomacher. You can give a besura another day. Vayom hazeh lo tuvaser. Do not be the mavaser today. Ki alkein bein hamelech meis. Because the king's son is dead. So you think it's besoros tovos. This is besoros ros. So Vayomer Yayev la Kushi. So Yayev says, Kushi means a man from Africa, presumably non-Jewish, a black man, who apparently was like an Eved, did not have a chashuv status. Lech haged lemelech asher. Just tell the king everything that you saw. Vayishtachu Kushi L'Yayev v'yaretz, and the Kushi bowed down and started running to give David the news. But Achimaatz really wants to do this job. V'yosef od Achimaatz ben Tzadok v'yomer el Yayev, v'hima, no matter what, arutzana agamani, I want to give David the news. Acharei Kushi, I will run after the Kushi, and maybe apprehend him even. V'yomer Yayev. And Yayev again repeats, Lama zat taratz b'ni, my son, why are you doing this? Ulecha ein besora motzas. To you, this besora is not found, meaning you're not the one that should give this besora. Vahima oretz, no matter what, I will run, I want to do it. Vayomer leiratz, so Yayev says, do what you want, run. Vayaratz Achimaatz derech hakikar, vayavor et hakushi. And Achimaatz was so much of a Zorus that he ran through the valley, Vayavor, and he passed the Kushi. He's going to get there first. So David is again in Machanayim. But David Yoshev ben Shnei Hasha'arim, there are two gates to the city, and David is sitting between an inner gate and outer gate. David is sitting between the gates, waiting for the tidings, both in terms of the victory or defeat, and maybe even more important, Avshalom. And there's a watchman who goes to the roof to see in the distance if anyone is coming. He lifts up his eyes. He sees a solitary runner. So he sees one runner coming. If he's all by himself, that's going to be good news, because if there would be a defeat, we would have a lot of soldiers coming back in defeat. But if only one person is coming, it must be that he has a message. Vayelech haloch v'karev, and the runner was getting closer. But then, Vayarat Seifeh, the watchman sees from the roof, Ish Acharatz, another person running, meaning this is Achimaetz, who is coming in front of the Kushi. Apparently he didn't pass him yet. Hine Ish Ratz, Vayarat Seifeh Ish Acharatz, another man, Vayikrat Seifeh Lashayar, and the Seifeh calls down to the gatekeeper, Vayomer, and he says, Hine Ish Ratz Labadu, another man is running by himself. They're not running together. Vayomer HaMelech Gamzem Avaser. This must be another person with news. Vayomer HaTseifeh, and then the Seifeh says, Ani Rayas Mrutas Harishain. Yeah, the first one was Achimatz. Achimatz already passed the Kushi. But the Kushi keeps on going. So he says, it looks like the first person who is running is Achimatz ben Sadek, who passed the Kushi. Vayomer HaMelech, Ish Tov Zeh. Achimatz is a good man, and based on the idea that you don't give a good person Besoros Ros, David said, it's a Besora Tova that's coming. And Achimatz gets there first, even though the Kushi left first. Vayikra Achimatz Vayomer LaMelech Shalom, peace, everything is the Vayishtachu LaMelech Liapa Barza. He bowed down to the king. Vayomer Baruch Hashem Elokecha, blessed is Hashem, your God, because it's in your zechus and your tzidkus. Asher Siger es ha'anoshim Asher Nasu es Yadam Adonai HaMelech, that God has delivered to you, meaning defeated them, the people that raised their hands against you. So David is now a little worried, because that's none other than Avshalom. V'yamer HaMelech, Shalom l'nar Avshalom. Is everything okay with the kid Avshalom? Always to say, don't hurt him. V'yamer Achimatz, and Achimatz says, Ra'isi ha'hamayin hagadol l'shlayach es Eved HaMelech Yaya v'yas abdecha v'lo yadati ma. Now he realizes he doesn't want to tell the story. I just saw all of the tumult of Yayav sending me to give a Basura, and I don't really know what happened. I know that we won. Vayomer HaMelech. So the Melech is now suspicious and worried. Saif, stay here. Turn around and just stay here. Hisyat Seif Ko, stay here, and I want to hear the second messenger. Vayiso v'yamid. V'hine hakushi ba, the African came, v'yaymar hakushi. Yisbaser Adonai HaMelech, I'm giving you good news, my master the king. Yishaftecha Hashem hayom miyad kol hakamach, God has judged you favorably from all who are rising against you. V'yaymar HaMelech el hakushi. Hashalom l'nar li Avshalom, is there shalom to my child Avshalom? So the Kushi is a bit naive. Vayomer HaKushi, Yiyu Kinar Oivei Adonai HaMelech. May all the enemies of the king have the fate of this young man. V'chayil Asher Kamu Alecha L'ra. And all that try to do bad to you should have his fate. David now understands that his son is dead, and in the next parak we will learn about the tremendous grief and suffering that David had as a result of Avshalom's death, and the fact that he declared that I wish I would have died instead of you. And it's interesting that he said Avshalom B'ni 7 times. And Chazal say, each time he brought Avshalom up from Gehenna. Gehenna has 7 divisions. He brought him up, and then he brought him to Eilam Haba. And this was the kayach of the tefillah of David HaMelech. So we finished Perek Yud Ches. We will go weiter with Perek Yud Tes.